Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Brennan with the Notre Dame Alumni Association. Thanks so much for joining us for another edition of Behind the Headlines. Today we're going to be exploring the Catholic Church's Jubilee Year of Mercy, and we're so lucky to have with us someone who's playing an important role in that Year of Mercy. Father Joe Corpora is a Holy Cross priest and a 1976 graduate of Notre Dame. Here at the university, he's the Director of University School Partnerships at the Alliance for Catholic Education, and in February he added another title. Father Joe was commissioned by Pope Francis as a Missionary of Mercy, one of only roughly 700 priests worldwide to be given this important role. Today, Father Joe is going to be telling us about that role and about the Year of Mercy more broadly, and we're thrilled that he could join us. Father Joe, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for the invitation, Kevin. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
For those of you watching live, Father Joe is going to be taking questions throughout today's program. You can start submitting your questions right now. You can do so using the form just beneath the streaming player where you are watching us, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can. So, Father Joe, to start, I thought, could you just begin by explaining to those who are unfamiliar what the Year of Mercy is and what kind of was the impetus for establishing it?
Thanks, Kevin. I really believe that the Holy Spirit gave Pope Francis an extraordinary grace to look at the signs of the times and to read them. And he did that. And in his wisdom and in his prompting by the Holy Spirit, he thought the world and the church might need a year of mercy. And so on April 11th, I think, 2015, he published that we were going to have a year of mercy. But the Pope intuited that the world is in dire need of mercy. Every person as an individual, we all need God's mercy. We need it as countries, as neighborhoods, because in the end, we will all be saved by God's mercy and by nothing else. So I just think the Holy Spirit gave our Holy Father that grace, and he acted upon it. And now we're like, one of the things that I always point out, we've had a couple of thematic years. We've had the Year of the Family, great year. Year of Faith, Year of Consecrated Life. But to be perfectly honest, they begin with a big flurry, and then you don't hear about them until they're done. But this is quite the opposite. The Year of Mercy keeps growing in interest and in excitement and in the desire to accept and embrace God's mercy.
And so for the average Catholic, what is the Year of Mercy going to mean for us? How is it impacting us? And what can we do to get involved in it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, no one's average. But I think that what it means is for people to try to believe as strongly as they can, that God's mercy overpowers everything else. Everybody walks around with a bit of a feeling that if the darkest things I've ever done were on the 6 o'clock news, I'd be really embarrassed. Well, we all would be. But God's mercy overpowers that. God's mercy, as the Pope describes it, is forgiveness with a caress from God. And then, the Pope, he's going as far as to say that the name of God is mercy. And that's even more than saying it's an attribute of God, but that it is his name, that he is mercy. So the average Catholic or anyone in the world, I think the hope is that each person opens herself or himself to this relentless mercy of God, and in the process comes to know that he or she is saved, redeemed by God, and then you just want to extend that mercy. That's what I would say. And people can experience God's mercy in a number of ways, of course, limitless ways. But one way is through the sacrament of reconciliation. And there certainly has been an uptick in people going to reconciliation during the Year of Mercy, wanting to know this God of mercy.
I know, you've been involved in an increased number of confessions, I believe. We spoke about off the top how you have been commissioned a Missionary of Mercy. Can you explain what that is, what this new role you have that you're filling?
When the Pope wrote his letter about the Year of Mercy, he said in there, I intend to commission missionaries of mercy throughout the world in February, that they will be a sign of the Church's maternal solicitude for all people. That the missionaries would be a sign of God's mercy, and the Pope extended to the missionaries the authority to forgive certain sins that only the Holy See can forgive. They're called reserved sins. But that's not the major part of the year. The major part was that we would do whatever we could to preach about God's mercy, to hear confessions, and accept it in our own lives, that we might be able to extend it to others. So when I read the Pope's letter about Missionaries of Mercy, I'm like, my life is a story of God's mercy. I have received nothing but mercy. I always say that when I write a book, and the title of the book is going to be Mercy Upon Mercy Upon Mercy Upon Mercy. And every chapter will be called Mercy. And I mean that sincerely. So when I read that, I thought, oh, I want to be one of these. But how do you become one? Well, no one knew. I asked our provincial, and he thought it was a great idea, but he did not know. I asked Bishop Rhodes. He thought it was a great idea, but he did not know. Do you want me to tell you the whole story of how it happened then?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So anyway, Bishop Rhodes did send me an email address saying, write to this person and ask for information. So I wrote, never heard back. So I just gave up on it. And then one day, December 22nd, I was sitting in a hotel room in Monterrey, Mexico, working there on an ACE project. And I got an email, and I looked at it, and it was from someone named Carmela Marcone. I'm like, yeah. This is someone who's like a long-lost relative in Naples whose purse was stolen, and in the purse was her passport. And if I just wired $5,000 via this number, she'll be fine. You know how you get those emails.
Right.
And I was about ready to delete it until I saw it said, Dear Reverend Father. And there it was. It was a letter from Archbishop Rino Fisichella, who is I think the head of the Commission for the New Evangelization. And it was a letter saying I'd been appointed. And it's interesting because the bishop didn't know about it. And it said very, very clearly, in order to be appointed, you had to have a letter of recommendation from your bishop. But that didn't happen, nor did the provincial. So I don't know how it happened.
Wow.
Except in my ACE work, I work a lot with bishops, and perhaps some other bishop did it. I don't really know, but I'm grateful.
And so, you didn't know how it happened. How surprised were you then, and how, grateful were you? Because it was something you said that immediately resonated you when you first read about the Year of Mercy.
Well, I wept when I read the letter. Well, actually, I was on my iPhone, and there was an attachment. I'm like, you know how you try to open that darn attachment as quickly as I could. And then I read the attachment. I just cried. But I didn't know what it would mean. All it said in the letter is you have to go to Rome February 9th or we highly suggest that you go to Rome February 9th to be mandated by the Holy Father. But I didn't know what the year would begin to look like after that. Mm-hmm. So I did go to Rome. Gratefully went to Rome and was there for, the Holy Father gave us a talk. About 30 minutes. It was really beautiful. Just beautiful. When I saw him, I said, I love that man. I mean, I've always loved this Pope, but this time I was like, wow. The first impression when you meet the Holy Father or see him is he's the guy you see on television.
Yeah.
Nothing false. He's the real deal. And whenever I meet someone like a priest or a bishop or a pope, which I never have before, I always say to myself, within 5 minutes, if I can go to confession to that person, then that person is, for me, a real person. Mm-hmm. I can go to confession to the Pope. No doubt about it.
And so when you were in Rome and meeting the Pope, did you have to receive special training to be a missionary of mercy? What all went into it?
Well, when you introduced me, the most important thing about my life you forgot, and that's I am a sinner whose sins are forgiven. So in order to be a missionary of mercy, you just have to be a sinner and know that your sins are forgiven. It's so interesting. People think it's like a promotion, or people think it's like, I don't know, maybe I got it for being good. No. I mean, really what it is an opportunity to extend God's mercy.
Yeah.
And it's like the woman in Luke 7:47 who washes Jesus' feet with her hair, washes them with her tears and dries them with her hair. And Jesus says, she has loved much because she has been forgiven much. And in order to be forgiven much, you have to know your sinfulness. Then you're forgiven much, or you're at least aware of it. Then you can love much. So there's no special training, though the Pope did talk to us extensively about hearing confessions and being available and always smiling. He said, right, exactly these words. When people come to confession to you and you can't smile, maybe you should get a different job. It was pretty strong coming from the Pope. But it's easy to smile. And then he said, he gave some other instructions about not to pry. People already are in confession feeling shamed. And so to not ask unnecessary questions. He said it this way, don't ask questions that are for your benefit. Only ask a question if it's for their benefit. And he said, use the language of gestures. Yeah, okay, I got it. And not to show what he kept calling the maternal face of the church, the mother who welcomes whomever so comes to the church. I don't know if that was training, but it was beautiful words for him to say. One point he said, if you feel like you're forgiving people too easily or too much, put it on my tab. I'll take care of it. This is just a great line. You got to love a Pope that says something like that.
As we said, there are only 700 or so priests who've been commissioned Missionaries of Mercy. I imagine all of them were at the Vatican at that time. Did you have the opportunity to interact with the Pope personally at all?
Well, I did. You want to know how? We all walked into this big room, and they were in language groups, Italians first, then English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, German, Portuguese, French. I forgot all the languages, sorry. But anyway, so I was in the English-speaking group, and I was in row 6. So I thought, ooh, I'm pretty close to the Pope, but too far away. Then I saw a priest in row 3 just get up and move his chair to row 1. So I got up and moved my chair to row 3. Seemed like it was a thing to do.
Yeah.
And I was right behind in row 2 there was a priest, and next to him was a suitcase. He had come from the airport. So I said to him, Father, can we move your suitcase out of the way? So we moved it, and I got into row 2, pushed right up into row 2. And this is a little bit embarrassing, but I sat behind the only priest in the whole place in a wheelchair. Why do you think that's the case? Who does the Pope go to immediately every time you see him on television? Someone in a wheelchair.
Right.
I tried to find a stretcher and lay down, but there wasn't any there. So I sat right behind that guy, and as sure as God is my witness, when the Pope came off stage, he went to that guy first. And he just puts his hands out into the crowd, and I grabbed his hand and I just kissed it. And all I could say was Santo Padre, Holy Father. I had a whole speech prepared. Nothing would come out except Santo Padre. And I looked at him, he looked at me, and, like a split second, and then he goes on to the next person. But I'll never forget the moment.
Well, that was great. Great strategic planning on your part. So as you return from the Vatican, come back here to the United States and to campus, how has your life changed now that you've taken on this new role?
Well, personally, I try to be more merciful. I don't want people to go, oh, look at him, he's a missionary of mercy acting like that. So I try to think about not every move I make, but how I am as a person. And I have heard lots and lots and lots of confessions, in parish penance services all around the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend. And then I have received invitations to talk to presbyterates, which is the body of priests in a diocese. So here, Fort Wayne, South Bend, Newark, and then I have a couple lined up in the future, like Seattle, I think Juneau. I'll be in Anchorage in the summer. So, and I've had opportunity to write for the magazine. I've had opportunity, many talks, a talk here, a talk there, this kind of a thing. And before I begin, I just say, oh God, help me to say the words that people will know that your mercy overpowers and overshadows everything, and let them accept that mercy, and may my own words help them towards that.
You said that you've tried to be more merciful in your life. What kind of tips can you pass on to those of us who would also like to try to be more mercy? Is it just being more thoughtful, thinking about that? How have you put that into practice in your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, the thing that everybody struggles with is judging other people. We all struggle with that. And if we knew all the data in a person's life, we wouldn't judge them. One time I was in a car, and I was in a very tight parking spot, and the person in front of me, the driver ran into the store to get something, and the passenger was just sitting there. And if the car had only been moved maybe 8 inches, I could have gotten out. And they wouldn't move the car. I'm just honking, thinking, why doesn't that person just get over the driver's seat and move the car? So I went up to yell at them. They were blind.
Wow.
I felt so badly. But I thought to myself, if I had the data, I wouldn't have done that. And that's the truth in every single situation that we judge. If you had all the data, you'd think twice. So when you say how to become more merciful, I would say 2 things. You know, one is recognizing that we never have the data. Only God has all the data, and that's why he's entirely merciful. And the other thing is to realize that I myself have been given a lifetime of mercy, so why not extend it? Right. It's just a thoughtful thing. You got to think about it. Okay, I'm not gonna. I haven't stopped judging, but from the time I make a judgment until I withdraw it, it's getting shorter and shorter. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like in 2 seconds, I go, okay, Joe, you don't know all the data there. Let's not think this is the whole situation.
Right. Reminder for those of you watching live, Father Joe's taking your questions. You can submit them now and throughout the program using the form just below the streaming player where you're watching us. And I think we're ready to take our first question from our viewers here. It comes from Mimi. What is a simple way to explain the concept of mercy?
That's a really good question. Someone asked me that the other day, and I don't know. And this is what I said. You know it when you see it. I don't know that I can explain it, but when you see it, like in the story of the Good Samaritan, I guess you can explain what he did, but that's not a concept. He did something. So, you know, we just know when we see it. If it were a concept, I don't know how to explain that apart from it. Does that make sense, Mimi?
She says yes. No.
I don't know how to explain it. It's like trying to explain God. If the name of God is mercy, it's hard to explain God, but you know it when you see it. That's what I would say.
Sure. Let's go to another question from our viewers. This one is from Joseph. Another Joseph. Mercy is hard to define. Can we show mercy to those who have authority over us or with whom we have little direct contact?
Well, if to show mercy to those who have authority over us would be like a person's boss or religious superior or bishop or manager. And I can say that it's easier to show mercy to those people if you've been in those jobs. Like I was a pastor 19 years, and so it's easier for me to show mercy to an authority above me because for a long time I was the authority, and I know how hard it is. And you try to do your best. And recognizing that that person is probably doing the best they can with what they have, most likely. And people we have little contact with, I don't know if that means like the poor in another country. But, you know, part of the here of mercy is to do the corporal works of mercy and the spiritual works of mercy. And there's never a time when we could say, okay, now all the hungry have been fed, so now I go to the next one. So there's, whether it's an opportunity to simply pray or to go somewhere in your own city and assist in some way, even if it's a once a year thing. See, what's behind the corporal and the spiritual works of mercy is people interacting. So if I go down to the center for the homeless and serve a meal, I'm interacting. But see, this is related to what the Pope is thinking of. The Pope talks about the culture of encounter. And what he means by that is human to human, not rich to poor, documented and undocumented, straight to gay, divorced to married, Christian to non-Christian, Anglo to Mexican, African American to Asian, or the many categories that can make up our lives, but human to human. And how much different the world would be. Well, what happens if I relate to you as a human and you relate to me as a human, you know what we have in common? Mercy. And we'll know what we need, our need for mercy. Mm-hmm. And we'll just know that. We just know it. So the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, which we should be taking part in a particular way during this year of mercy, all have the opportunity to bring us into contact with people. And in that contact, if we're able to enter it as human to human, we will know our common need for God's mercy and that's what saves us.
We have another question here coming in from a viewer, this one from Peter. Peter asks, how can we bring his message of mercy to middle school teenagers?
Tough question. Well, their lives are wrapped up in drama. At least as I remember when I was a pastor, middle school was tough times in people's lives. And it may not be possible to bring it en masse to the whole group, but one-on-one, people can be invited to understand mercy but you're working against a whole culture of teenagers, or not a bad culture, but when people are sort of biting, what's that word? They're sort of coming into their own. And any teenager has made a lot of mistakes. So to appeal to their mistakes and accepting God's mercy might be a way of trying to do that. But that's it's one of those things that has to be, in the parable of the prodigal son, which is misnamed. We can say more about that later if you wish. The father has separate ways to interact with both sons. His intention is the same, to love them both. But to one he says one thing, to one he says another. So maybe that's how it has to be with teenagers. Maybe it's like that with everybody, but particularly teenagers who will need to hear this message and that message. But to repeat myself, to help them see that they have been saved by God's mercy might be a way to do it with teenagers.
You mentioned the parable of the prodigal son is misnamed. What should it be named?
Yeah, well, as according to the Holy Father, and I agree, and he's not the first one to say this, it should be the parable of the merciful father. You see, in the parable, Kevin, both sons are guilty of the same sin. The one thinks he's too bad to receive God's mercy. The other one thinks he's too good to need it. So it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Both sons disrespect the father. And yet the father takes neither one to task, nor asks any kind of a harsh repentance of either one. And you get the idea that with the younger son, he goes out the front door and says, come on in, come on home. And then the older one, he goes out the back door. He's coming down from the fields. And he says, come on in. And you know what? We never know what either son does. We know what the father says, get the fattened calf and the robe, we don't know what they do. Mm-hmm. But the story is in the end about mercy going to both of them. One thinking that he's never going to get it because he's screwed up so much, and one thinking he's too obedient to ever need it. And the story, that's why the Pope refers to this as the parable of the merciful father, because it is that. It's exactly that.
Yeah.
That's the logo, for the Year of Mercy, is the parable of the prodigal son.
That's great.
Parable of the merciful father, sorry.
Let's take another question from the audience here. This one, I believe, is coming into us from Rooney. I think we have another question queued up here, or from Maureen, excuse me. How does the Doors of Mercy series, especially the 8 sessions on the Old Testament, fit into the overall concept for the year?
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know how to answer that question, so I can't try, except that the doors in our lives are gateways. And so the door itself is probably not as important as understanding to go through a door to enter into as a gateway to the mercy of God. That's the only way I can think about that, but I don't know the exact answer to that question. I'm sorry, Rooney.
And we have a Door of Mercy here on campus, isn't it, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because in the United States, all basilicas, all cathedrals use the same doors every week, so it doesn't seem anything special. But like at St. Peter's, there's one door that gets opened every time there's a Jubilee year. And in Latin America, that's true too. Most cathedrals, for example, have a main set of doors which are never opened, even the side ones, but the main ones are opened every Jubilee year. So it has more symbolic power. We had a beautiful ceremony here on our own doors in the Basilica, but everyone used them the day before and the day after, so it didn't seem any different.
Yeah.
But the attention was drawn to that doors are passageways, gateways, and in this instance, into the mercy of God.
A reminder for those of you joining us live, we're taking your questions. You can submit them using the form just beneath the video player where you're watching us. And I think we've got another question coming in here. This is from Eileen. Will there be a time of mercy for divorced and remarried Catholics? Many of us want to reconcile but cannot.
I don't know if you would have had the time yet to read the apostolic exhortation after the synod. And the Pope, how do I want to say this? One of the things he says is that we have to understand pastorally all sorts of situations. And what the church does not need is another set of canonical rules. But he does say that situations should be worked out, prayed about, and talked about in consultation with the pastor or some pastoral minister. So the Pope does not go and say people in second marriages should go to communion, but it doesn't say they shouldn't. He doesn't say that. I think this is the genius of the Holy Father. And he says it clearly. There's lots and lots of situations that need to be discussed pastorally, and probably the best way is not to make new rules, but to work within the pastoral understanding of the church. And in that, I hope that many people who are in second marriages will be able to feel the embrace of the church and find their way back to the Eucharist. That's why I would answer that question. If we're looking for rules to say, oh, it's all okay, probably not. But situations in which people find a way of living in this, I think yes. But this is the history of the church. There's all sorts of things that weren't, and now are, and probably it simply happened over hundreds of years, and now there is, I don't know how to explain clearly the Petrine and the Pauline privileges about marriage, but those were pastoral situations 1,000 years ago. And they got worked out pastorally. Eventually they became law. Maybe this will too at some point. But it doesn't start out as law. It starts out as working out pastoral situations in loving, merciful, kind ways. And maybe 150 years from now, it will be the law.
Sure. Let's take another question here from our live viewers. This one comes in from Holly. How can we best reflect mercy to those who reject faith and love?
Well, show it nonetheless. Mercy is not dependent upon someone receiving it for it to be mercy. For example, we don't ever know in the parable of the Good Samaritan if the guy that got beat up and then got tended to ever said thank you. We have no idea.
Right.
The guy just took him and brought him to the inn and paid his money and bandaged him up and said, I'll see you on the way back. But we never find out if the person even was grateful or said thank you. But so, or if he had any faith, we have no idea. We know that he wasn't an Israelite. He was a Samaritan. And maybe he never wanted to talk to an Israelite. But it didn't matter. Mercy was still shown. So for mercy to be shown, it's not dependent upon it being received.
All right, next question here.
This is great.
Yeah, it comes in from Marjorie. When in a place of authority in the workplace, how do we show mercy to those who work hard but do not feel appreciated or recognized in their efforts?
Let me look at that question again. When in a place of authority in the workplace, how do we show mercy to those who do not feel recognized
Or appreciated?
Well, if I'm the one in authority, I figure out how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I'm not the one in authority, so if I'm the one in authority, I try in as many ways as I can to value the people that report to me. And hundreds of ways to do that, dozens of ways. And plus, you have to find ways, just like any good parent, you have to find ways to incentivize each kid and make each kid successful. If I'm not the person in authority, and I see other people who are not respected or treated well, I don't know, perhaps I find a way of bringing that to the attention of the person in authority. I don't know. But, or I myself try to extend myself to those who don't feel appreciated, even though I'm not the one in authority, but I see the one in authority isn't doing that.
Let's take another question here from a viewer. This one's from Kathleen. At 94 years, how can I make mercy more a part of my life?
Dear Kathleen, the only thing I would say is to open your heart in every ounce of your life to the mercy of God. You cannot not be more merciful. You know, we know Teresa of Lisieux was one of the most merciful people ever, and she never left the convent, never went outside of Lisieux, never went outside of that building. Yet we know her as a person of mercy. So I would say, dear Kathleen, open your life as widely as you can to the mercy of God. That will make you more merciful. And even if, I don't know if you're homebound, there's all sorts of people that you can think about and pray for. And there's a phrase, I think of from Benedict XVI, like a reservoir of mercy. So put some mercy into that reservoir for someone who might need it that you don't even know.
Father, you mentioned earlier that there are certain sins which missionaries of mercy are able to kind of grant penance and forgiveness for that you wouldn't normally be able to. What are those sins?
Okay, first of all, there are certain sins called reserved sins, and these are reserved to the Holy Father, because by doing them, you're automatically excommunicated. Mm-hmm. And in the Pope giving authority to the Missionaries of Mercy to forgive those sins, I don't think that he thought it'd be the major part of our work, and it's not, but it's just a sign of how broadly he wants mercy to be out there. So those 4 sins, at least in the instructions you get from the Holy Father that we are allowed to forgive, would be: 1 is a bodily attack on the Pope. 2 is desecration of the Eucharist. 3 is breaking the seal of the confessional. So I can't write my book after all. Okay, just kidding. And 4 is for a priest to forgive his own sexual partner in the confessional. So if the priest has had an affair with someone and that person comes to the priest and asks for goes to confession, and if the priest absolves that person, in all these instances, the priest incurs a sin reserved to the Vatican.
You said that you've been doing significantly more confessions than you were before you were commissioned a Missionary of Mercy. How frequently are you giving confessions, and how has the way that you experience confessions changed as a result of being a Missionary of Mercy?
Well, during Lent, it was a lot. And I'm not complaining, but a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And then I've had opportunities to hear confessions of priests when I go speak to groups of priests. So how has it changed me? I make sure I smile every time. And I try to be patient. I think I am pretty patient, but I make an extra effort that nobody would leave thinking they were sent out too quickly or that they were not heard. So that for sure is a way that this has affected me, and especially the smile when people come in. The Pope always tells a story when he was 16 years old on the Feast of St. Matthew, September 21, he went to confession, and in that confession, he always says, I don't remember a thing the priest told me, but he smiled at me, and I knew I was forgiven. And that's when he decided to become a priest.
What has been the most personally kind of moving part of this whole experience of being a Missionary of Mercy for you?
I would say that when a person with whom I've had the privilege to speak in confession or out of confession has the moment of knowing I am forgiven and I am redeemed and God's mercy is big. Because all of us have things we've not forgiven ourselves for, even though God has, but we haven't. So if a person can get to that moment, it's a great act of mercy and grace from God and some little minimal role that I might have played in it. That's what I would answer the question.
How does the Year of Mercy kind of fit into the larger arc of Pope Francis's papacy and what will ultimately be his legacy?
I just love him. I just love him. I want everyone to know that I love the Pope. When I was a boy, we used to sing a song, Long Live the Pope. I'm trying to bring it back. Anyway, you know, from his first homily that he gave when he was Pope on March 13th, or March 14th, I don't remember now exactly. Anyway, he said, we might tire of asking God for forgiveness, but he never tires of forgiving us. So this fits perfectly into what I think will be his papacy. And I was reading something the other day, and it said something that's totally true. It says this: the Pope is inviting everybody in and asking no one to leave. Mercy fits totally. Everybody fits. Nobody has to go. So this will be. He'll be. I mean, everyone calls him now like the Pope of the people, but I think in history he might become known as the Pope of Mercy. He doesn't never not talk about it. Every Wednesday audience, every homily, he works it in some which way. So it's the gem, whatever the right word would be, of his papacy. In the book called The Name of God is Mercy, there's a great little story in there where a priest came to him when he was Archbishop in Buenos Aires and says, oh, I think I'm forgiving people too easily and too quickly. And then the Pope says, the guy says, when I do that, I just go to look at the tabernacle and I go, Jesus, I think I'm forgiving people too easily. But you set the bad example. I'm just following you. That's the Pope.
Mm-hmm. Father Joe, you were kind enough to come here today and share your thoughts with everyone. You also, as you mentioned earlier, have been writing some really great reflections for Notre Dame Magazine's website.
Well, I didn't say they were great. You did.
I said they were great, which they are, at magazine.nd.edu. People can find that. If folks who've watched this want to be able to learn more, read more, are there any other resources you'd recommend for people to learn more about the Year of Mercy and experience the Year of Mercy?
Well, yeah, there's so many websites, including the one from the Vatican. It's called im.va. But you can there's books. Oh my gosh, there's book after book after book. Crossing the Threshold of Mercy, The Mercy of God, The Church of Mercy. So there's all sorts of things that you can read. There's no end to that. That's one thing. And then there's these websites that will livemercy.org, mercytoday.org. You just type in mercy in the Google search there, and all sorts of things will come up. And in the end, what I kind of said at the beginning is perhaps going to confession or, seeking the mercy of God in a tangible kind of way. The mercy of God is not one of those things that you can imagine. It has to be extended to you by God, and usually through a person. Otherwise, you're just imagining it, and that doesn't do it. So if another human being knows the darkness of your life and says, "Yep, it's okay," mercy will rise over this as well. Then you know it. So I would say if a person is struggling with accepting God's mercy in his or her life, and not knowing how to get it, think about confession. Think about something along those lines, especially confession. It's a sacramental moment. But in the mercy of God, you can't imagine it. It has to be extended to you, and you know it. And then, taking part in the works of mercy.
Well, Father Joe, thank you so much for taking the time out today to come share your experiences and discuss the year of mercy with us and to answer our questions. And thank you for everything you're doing as a missionary of mercy, both here on campus and around the country and around the world, playing such a key role in the year of mercy. We all really appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. But, let it be known that I also am being changed by it. Please God. And that my self-definition as a sinner whose sins are forgiven makes me, I'm so much more aware of that and so much more grateful. I got to go to heaven because I will need all eternity, and not even one day less, all eternity, to thank God for all he's done in my life. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's a great notion to end on, Father. So thanks again. Thank you to all of you who've joined us live or watching later on My Notre Dame or on our YouTube page. Remember, for all of our past online learning events and to keep up to date on our upcoming events, you can visit us at my.nd.edu/learn, or you can go on YouTube and search for the Notre Dame Alumni Association. I'm Kevin Brennan. Thanks so much for watching.